came to return a box. He left carrying something he never expected, the truth about the woman who had quietly dismantled 2 lives without ever looking back. There's a moment most people never talk about, the one after the goodbye is already decided, when you're just showing up to collect the wreckage. Daniel Mercer knew that moment well. He thought he was walking into an ending. What he found instead was a beginning neither of them asked for. If this story pulls something loose in you, hit like and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this one travels. The cardboard box wasn't heavy. That was the part that got to him. Standing outside apartment 4C at 7:40 in the evening, rain starting to spit against the back of his neck, and the box in his arms weighing maybe 11 pounds. 11 pounds for 8 months of his life with Vivian Hart. He hadn't packed it himself. He'd asked his daughter Maya to stay at his sister's place for the night, told her he had an errand, and then spent 20 minutes in his own bedroom staring at the items he'd pulled from the corners of his apartment where Vivian's things had gathered like sediment. A charger she'd left. A hardback she'd never finished. A scarf she'd mentioned once and then apparently forgotten existed. A bottle of expensive face serum, the kind that made him wince at the price tag when he'd seen it on the bathroom shelf. A photo strip from one of those old-fashioned booths they'd done on a rainy Saturday in October, back when things still felt possible. He'd put the photo strip in last. Then he'd taken it out. Then put it back in again. That was the kind of man he was now, he thought, standing in his own hallway debating a photo strip. The elevator in Vivian's building was one of those small mirrored cages that made you hyper-aware of your own face. Daniel watched himself ride up to the 4th floor and tried to decide if he looked like someone who had it together. He'd worn a decent jacket. He'd shaved. His eyes gave him away. There was something tired in them that went past regular tired, the kind of tired that takes up residence and starts charging rent. The hallway smelled like someone had cooked garlic earlier, and the ghost of it was still haunting the carpet. He walked to 4C and knocked twice, the way he always had, because Vivian had a thing about doorbells, said they were aggressive. He'd thought it was a quirky preference once. He now recognized it as the first of many things about Vivian Hart that he had learned to adapt around without ever being asked whether adapting suited him. He waited. The chain lock rattled and the door opened to the limit of its chain, and the woman standing in the gap was not Vivian. She was younger looking than she probably was, with brown hair pulled back in that kind of messy, practical way that suggests you stopped caring about it 3 hours ago. She was in scrubs, pale blue, and she was holding a mug like it was the only thing anchoring her to the floor. She had dark circles under her eyes that were genuinely impressive, the kind you earn over weeks, not nights. She looked at Daniel, then at the box, then back at Daniel. "Hi," she said, not unfriendly, just careful. "Hey, sorry, I'm looking for Vivian. Vivian Hart." He shifted the box in his arms. "I'm Daniel. We were together. I just needed to drop this off." The woman's expression did something small and complicated. She unlatched the chain and opened the door wider, and he saw behind her that the apartment was wrong. Not messy wrong, but sparse wrong. The living room had the particular blankness of a space that has been recently and deliberately stripped. A couch remained, and a lamp, and the kitchen table. But the shelves were empty. The wall where Vivian kept her framed prints was bare, the slight shadow rectangles where the frames had hung still visible. "She's gone," the woman said. "She moved out, like..." She glanced back at the room as if confirming it to herself. "All the way out. Most of her stuff is gone. I noticed yesterday." Daniel stood there. "Yesterday," he repeated. "Maybe the day before. I work nights. I haven't been home much." She stepped back a little from the doorway. "I'm Mara. I'm her roommate. Was her roommate." She said the second sentence flatly, without drama, but something in her face had tightened. "You want to come in? You can put that down at least." He shouldn't have come in. He knew that in the abstract, the way you know a lot of things abstractly before a situation makes all the abstract reasoning irrelevant. He came in. The kitchen had the overhead light on, bright and a little unforgiving. Mara stood at the counter and refilled her mug from a pot of coffee that looked like it had been sitting there for a while. She offered him some with a gesture, and he nodded even though he didn't really want it. He set the box on the table and looked at the bare wall where Vivian used to keep that print, the black and white photograph of some bridge somewhere, New York or possibly London. He'd never actually checked, and felt something in his chest that wasn't exactly grief and wasn't exactly anger. It was closer to the feeling of reaching into a pocket for something and finding it empty. The mild, disorienting recognition that what you expected to be there isn't. "When did you two break up?" Mara asked. She was leaning against the counter, both hands on her mug, and she was watching him with a kind of careful attention that didn't feel intrusive. It felt more like, he searched for the right word, clinical. The way someone looks at a situation when they're trying to assess it accurately. 3 weeks ago, he said. She called, kept it short, said she thought we wanted different things. He paused. I called back the next day and she didn't pick up, texted a few times. Nothing. Mara nodded slowly. Did she explain anything? No. He said it simply, without bitterness he could hear, though it was there. I got a message about 10 days ago saying she'd left some things at my place, and could I return them when I had a chance. That was basically it. Mara made a small sound that was not quite a laugh. She looked down at her coffee. What? Daniel said. Nothing. She shook her head. Sorry, it's very her, that's all. She straightened slightly. She texted me about 2 weeks ago saying she was going to be transitioning living situations and that she'd keep paying her half of the rent through end of the lease. Just dropped that in a text at 11 in the morning while I was sleeping between shifts. A pause. No discussion, no timeline, just informing me. She pays the rent from wherever she is now? Presumably. The money showed up when it was supposed to. Mara set her mug down. I don't know where she went. I don't know who she went to. Another pause. I'm not sure she considered it relevant information to share with me. Daniel pulled out one of the kitchen chairs and sat down. Not because he'd decided to stay, but because his legs seemed to make the decision before he did. How long did you two live together? He asked. 14 months. Mara sat down across from him, pulling one knee up onto the chair in a way that seemed unconscious. We weren't close, exactly. She wasn't someone you get close to easily. But I don't know what I thought. I thought we had some kind of arrangement that was at least honest. That she'd tell me things I needed to know. Daniel looked at the box on the table. The corner of the photo strip was just visible under the scarf. Was she always like that? He asked. The way she handled things? Mara thought about it, which he appreciated. She didn't rush to answer. She was always efficient, Mara said finally. That's the word that came to mind when I first moved in. She was just very efficient about everything. The apartment, the chores, how we divided things up. At first I thought it was refreshing. I was used to messy roommate situations, and she was just clean and organized and direct. She paused. It took me a while to figure out the difference between direct and just not considering the other person. Yeah, Daniel said. It took me a while too. He'd met Vivian at a fundraiser for an architectural preservation nonprofit. Not because either of them was particularly passionate about the nonprofit, but because his company had donated labor on one of their projects, and he'd been invited, and she'd been invited because she was the kind of person who maintained the right professional relationships. She'd been standing by the bar, bored in the way that beautiful, accomplished people can sometimes be bored at events like that, not bothering to disguise it. He'd found that interesting. Most people at those things worked so hard to perform engagement. He'd introduced himself. She'd given him exactly enough attention to seem interested without confirming it. He'd been fascinated. That should have told him something. The first few months had been good, better than good. Daniel hadn't felt that kind of momentum with someone in years, not since before his marriage fell apart, not since Maya was a baby, and everything had been different. Vivian was smart and interesting, and she laughed at genuinely unexpected things. She was willing to try the weird restaurant, willing to walk in the rain, willing to have a real argument about something rather than smoothing it over. He thought the arguments were good. He thought that was intimacy. What he slowly started to realize was that the arguments always ended in a very specific way, with him wondering if his perspective had been wrong. Not because she made good points exactly, though she sometimes did, but because she had this way of reframing things, subtle, patient, so that by the end of a conversation, you weren't quite sure what position you'd started with. He'd bring up something that bothered him, and by the time they were done, he'd be apologizing. He wasn't even always sure for what. He tried to explain this once to his friend Kev, and Kev had squinted at him and said, "That sounds exhausting." And Daniel had said, "It's not. It's stimulating. It's like she's always," and then he'd stop talking because he'd heard himself. Stimulating. He'd been describing emotional confusion as stimulating. 8 months in, he'd asked about the future. Not dramatically. He wasn't proposing, wasn't giving ultimatums. He'd just said quietly that he felt like they were at a point where he wanted to know if this was going somewhere real. He had a daughter. He had to be deliberate. He needed to know if she was actually in it. Vivian had looked at him for a long moment, that particular look she had, the one that felt like assessment, and said she thought they wanted different things. He'd tried to ask what she meant by that. She'd said she didn't want to make him feel bad. He'd said he wasn't asking her not to make him feel bad, he was asking for an explanation. She'd said she thought space would help them both. He'd said that wasn't an answer. 3 days later, the phone call. Short, conclusive, different things. He hadn't seen her since. Outside, the rain had shifted from a spit into something more committed. Daniel could hear it now against the window above the kitchen sink. That steady, insistent sound that settles into a city and refuses to negotiate. He should go. He knew he should go. He had work in the morning, a brownstone rehab project in Carroll Gardens that was already 3 weeks behind because of a subcontractor situation he was still untangling, and he needed to call Maya before her bedtime. "Is there a building entrance I should leave the box at?" he asked. "Or a storage area?" Mara looked at the box. "I don't have a way to reach her either," she said, "and I don't know if I'd bother if I did." A beat. "You could leave it. I'll figure it out." He should have said thanks, said okay, said goodbye. Instead, he said, "Did you know about me when we were together?" Mara considered this with that same careful look. "I knew there was someone," she said. "I'd hear her on the phone sometimes. She didn't talk about you by name, not often. Once she mentioned she was seeing someone in construction and she said it like..." Mara stopped. "Like what?" "Like it was something she was trying on," Mara said. "I'm sorry, that's a shitty thing to say." "No," Daniel said. "I'd rather know." Mara nodded. She was quiet for a moment. She talked about her work all the time, her deals, her board, the company. She'd come home and decompress by listing everything she'd accomplished that day, like she was reading off a report. Another pause. "She never asked me about my shifts. Not once in 14 months. Daniel said nothing. "I don't know why I stayed," Mara continued, almost to herself. "I kept thinking there'd be this point where she'd, I don't know, recognize that I lived there too, that I was a person and not just an occupant." She laughed once, short and dry. 14 months. He understood that. The exact feeling of it. The way you keep waiting for someone to arrive fully in the relationship, to settle into it, and be actually present. And you keep deferring the recognition that they're not going to because you're not sure what you'd do if you acknowledged it. "What are you going to do about the apartment?" he asked. "I have no idea." She said it bluntly. "My name is on the lease. Her money is still coming through for now, apparently, but the lease is up in 4 months and I can't afford this place alone and I..." She stopped, shook her head. "I haven't actually processed it yet. I've been working doubles." "How many hours?" "This week? 64, I think." I stopped counting. She picked up her mug, found it empty, set it back down. "I'm a night shift ER nurse. The hospital is perpetually understaffed. I picked up extra shifts because..." She thought about it. "Honestly, because it was easier to be at work than to come home to this." She gestured at the empty living room behind her. Daniel leaned back in the chair. "I get that," he said. "I put in an extra week on a project in November, just to have somewhere to be." They looked at each other across the kitchen table. Two people in the too-bright kitchen of an apartment that felt recently emptied of something important, rain building outside. A box of another woman's belongings on the table between them. "I should probably go," he said. "Yeah," she said, but neither of them moved immediately. He called Maya while still in the elevator. His sister Denise put her on. Maya was 7, and at 7 she had opinions about when phone calls happened and what they were about. "Daddy, you said you'd be back for dinner." "I know, baby. I had to do something that took longer than I thought." "What thing?" "Just an errand." He stepped out into the lobby. The rain was visible through the glass door, serious now, running in sheets down the sidewalk. "Are you being good for Aunt Denise?" "I'm always good," Maya said, with the absolute unearned confidence of a 7-year-old who had recently hidden an entire plate of green beans in a plant pot. "You hide vegetables in the plant pot, Maya." "That is one time, and I'm never going to stop hearing about it." He laughed, actually laughed, and it caught him a little off guard, the feeling of it, real and involuntary, in the middle of this strange, flat evening. "Go to bed when Denise says," he told her. "I'll see you tomorrow morning." "Are you okay, Daddy?" The question stopped him. She was 7, and she asked it with complete sincerity, the way kids sometimes do, without the cushioning adults use, just the direct, unfiltered thing. "Yeah," he said. "I'm okay." "You sound kind of tired." "I am kind of tired." "Okay," she said, apparently satisfied. "Love you." "Love you, baby." He stood in the lobby after and watched the rain for a minute. He'd taken the subway here. Going back meant standing in this downpour until he got to the station, and then standing on a platform waiting for a train that would be delayed because in this city it was always delayed in the rain, as if the transit system registered precipitation as an occasion for reflection. He thought about Vivian walking away from this apartment, actually walking away, packing things carefully, arranging movers or carrying boxes herself, whichever was more efficient, without telling either of them, just informing them afterward. The way you'd inform a utility provider of a change of address. He turned around and took the elevator back up. Mara answered the door without the chain this time. She was still in the scrubs and had clearly not moved from the kitchen. She looked at him with an expression that was not quite surprised, more like the slight recalibration of someone who had estimated correctly. "The rain," he said. "I saw," she said. "There's more coffee." He came back in. They sat back at the table, and for a while they just drank coffee that was not good. It was old, slightly bitter, the kind you drink anyway because the point isn't the coffee. And the rain worked itself into a full-on storm, the window above the sink dark and streaming. "Tell me something about her that surprised you," Mara said eventually. "Like, something that didn't fit." Daniel thought about it. "She cried once," he said. "We were watching something, just a stupid movie, one of those disaster things. And there was a scene with a kid who couldn't find his parents, just a background scene, not even the main plot. And she cried." He paused. She didn't try to hide it or anything, just sat there and cried. And then the scene ended and she was fine again. He remembered thinking in that moment that he'd seen something real, something uncalculated. He'd thought, this is who she is underneath all the efficiency. "I probably read too much into it," he said. Mara was quiet for a moment. "She came home once after a board meeting," Mara said slowly, "and she sat down right here, this exact chair, I think, and she said, 'I fired someone today and I feel terrible.' Just said it out of nowhere. We weren't even having a conversation." A pause. "I asked her why she felt terrible, and she said because the person had a family and they didn't see it coming." Another pause. She sat with it for maybe 3 minutes. Then she got up, went to her room, and I heard her on the phone 20 minutes later closing a deal, like she'd filed it away. Daniel stared at the table. "I kept trying to get back to that version of her," he said. "The one who cried at the movie. I kept thinking if I could just..." He stopped. "I don't know, if I could just be patient enough or understanding enough or whatever enough, I'd get back to that." "I did the same thing," Mara said. "With the board meeting thing. I thought, she trusts me. She just told me something real. I thought it was the beginning of us actually being, I don't know, friends. And it wasn't. It was just a moment she needed to release something," Mara said, "and I was the nearest available container." Daniel looked up at her. "That's a hell of a way to put it." "I've had time to think about it." Mara looked tired, and not just physically. "I think that's genuinely how she relates to people. We weren't people she was in relationship with. We were people who were useful to her life in specific ways, and occasionally useful as a pressure valve. He didn't want it to be true. He sat with that, the not wanting it, because he'd learned slowly and with effort that not wanting something to be true was not the same as it not being true. When she called me, he said, when she ended it, her voice was very calm, like almost business call calm. I kept trying to find the hurt in it, some indication that this was costing her something. Was there any? Not that I could tell. He looked at his hands, and I kept thinking afterward, either she's incredible at hiding it, or she genuinely wasn't hurting, and I couldn't figure out which was worse. Mara said nothing for a moment. Outside, lightning, a brief white bright crack of it, lit the window and was gone. I think, she said carefully, that the answer to that question doesn't actually change anything. Either way, you're still here. He looked at her. She seemed mildly surprised she'd said it. Sorry, that sounded... I didn't mean it dismissively. I just mean the question of how much she felt it doesn't really help you feel less of it. No, he said. You're right. It doesn't. He paused. It's a nurse thing, isn't it? That. She looked at him. The way you said that, he said. It was... You redirected me off the unanswerable question toward something I could actually do something about. That's a skill. Mara blinked. And then, for the first time since he'd arrived, she smiled. It was a small smile, a little crooked, nothing performed about it. It was the smile of someone who doesn't do it on command. I guess it is, she said. I've never thought about it that way. What made you go into nursing? I wanted to fix things, she said simply, and I didn't want to be in an office. A pause. What made you go into restoration? Same answer, basically. He looked at the bare walls of the kitchen, the empty shelves visible through the doorway to the living room. I like taking something that's been damaged and making it solid again. I like the process of it. He paused. Also, I'm good with my hands, which my high school career counselor told me was not a viable professional pathway, so Mara laughed. Real, actual laughter, not polite laughter. What did he think you should do instead? Sales, Daniel said flatly. Oh no. He genuinely thought I had the personality for it. Do you? I had to look up what an extrovert was in order to understand why everyone thought I was one. I was just loud when I was nervous. That's apparently the same thing to some people. She was still smiling, shaking her head a little. The kitchen felt different than it had an hour ago. Still too bright, still sparse, but something in the quality of the air had shifted, loosened slightly, the way rooms do when the people in them stop being strangers. The storm outside redoubled, rain hammering the glass now, the kind that made the idea of going out into it genuinely unappealing. Daniel looked at the time on his phone. I've been here 2 hours, he said, with some surprise. You have, Mara said. She didn't say it like it was a problem. He thought about the subway, which would be a disaster in this. He thought about the brownstone project in Carroll Gardens and the morning it was going to require. He thought about Maya's question in the elevator. Are you okay, Daddy? And about how automatic his answer had been. And about how he wasn't sure anymore what the truthful version of it was. I should probably... He started. I know, she said. Although... She paused, looked at the window. There's a couch if you want to wait it out. I just... She seemed to be choosing her words with some care. I haven't talked to anyone like this in a really long time. That's not... I'm not asking you to stay. I just wanted to say it. He understood that, the exact weight of it. He sat back. I haven't either, he said. And the storm went on, loud and uninterested in their situation, battering the windows of the apartment, while the two of them sat in the too-bright kitchen and kept talking in the cautious, gradually opening way of people who have been alone with something hard for a long time and are only just remembering that they don't have to be. The box sat on the table between them, Vivian's things inside it, the photo strip buried beneath the scarf, and neither of them mentioned it again that night. He fell asleep on his couch sometime after midnight. He didn't mean to. He'd been sitting at one end of it while Mara sat at the other, both of them with coffee that had long gone cold, the storm still going outside. The conversation moving the way conversations sometimes do when it's late and you're tired and there's no longer any social performance left in you. They'd been talking about small things by then, unimportant things. His daughter's obsession with a particular animated show about a girl who could talk to insects. Mara's inexplicable hatred of cilantro. The way Brooklyn felt different at 3 in the morning than it did at any other hour. He woke up to gray light coming through the window and the sound of Mara in the kitchen, a cabinet opening and closing, the muted thud of a pan being set on a burner. He lay still for a moment, disoriented, and then the apartment settled around him and he remembered where he was and why. He sat up. The box was still on the kitchen table. He could see it from the couch. "You're up," Mara said, without turning around. She was in different clothes, jeans and a faded sweatshirt, her hair down now, loose around her shoulders. "I made eggs. You don't have to eat them." "I'll eat them," he said, because he was hungry and because it seemed rude not to. He used the bathroom, splashed water on his face, looked at himself in the mirror above the sink. He looked like someone who had slept on a stranger's couch, which was accurate. There was a small shelf above the toilet with 2 items on it, a tube of hand lotion and a paperback novel, the spine creased deeply at about the halfway point. He noticed the title without meaning to, something about a woman who walks across a country alone. He thought that seemed like a particular kind of reading choice. He came back to the kitchen and sat at the table. Mara set a plate in front of him. Scrambled eggs, a piece of toast, slightly uneven, one corner darker than the other. "I'm a better nurse than I am a cook," she said. "This is fine." He took a bite. It was actually fine. "Thank you." She sat across from him with her own plate and they ate for a while without talking, which was surprisingly comfortable. Not the silence of 2 people who don't know what to say. The other kind. "I have to get back to my daughter," he said eventually. "I know. And I have a job site at 8. "It's 6:40, she said. "You have time." He looked at her. "Do you have a shift today?" "Tonight, 7 to 7. She pressed her fork down into the last of her eggs. "So I have a whole day to exist in this apartment alone with all the walls she stripped bare." He didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything. He looked at the walls. "I keep thinking about the phone call," he said after a moment, "when she ended it." He hadn't meant to bring it up again. It came out anyway. "She said we wanted different things. I asked her what things specifically. She said she didn't want to be unfair to me." He paused. "I said me knowing the reason wasn't unfair to me. It was information I needed. She said she thought I'd be better off moving forward." Mara watched him. "She decided what I'd be better off with," he said, "without asking me." "She does that," Mara said quietly. "She decides the parameters for other people without consulting them." And she made it sound considerate. That was the thing. She made it sound like she was protecting me. He shook his head. "I spent 3 weeks thinking maybe she was right. Maybe I did want different things. And I just couldn't see it clearly because I was too close to it. And now?" He thought about it honestly. "Now I think she ended it the way she ended it because clean is easier than complicated. And she preferred easy over owing me an explanation." Mara nodded slowly. She looked like someone who recognized the specific shape of that realization. The flat, tired feeling of understanding something you'd been constructing excuses around. "I kept making excuses for her," Mara said, "about the roommate stuff. She's busy. She's under a lot of pressure. She's just not a warm person. That doesn't mean she's..." She stopped. "I made a whole internal case for her that she never asked me to make. Because you needed it to be explainable. Because I needed it to be survivable," Mara said. "If it was explainable, then I wasn't an idiot for staying. If there was a reason, then I had read the situation correctly and just misapplied it." She looked at her plate. "But I think the actual answer is simpler than that. I think she just didn't think about me very much." That sat between them for a moment. "How old are you?" Daniel asked, not intrusively, just because he'd realized he didn't know. 30, she said. "You?" 32. You have a kid at 32. Had her at 25. Her mom and we were together through college and a couple years after. Maya was planned, actually. We both wanted her." He paused. "The marriage ended when Maya was 2. Not dramatically, just, we wanted different things. He caught himself using those words and made a slight face. That phrase is doing a lot of work in my life lately. Mara smiled at that, small and real. What happened with the marriage, if you don't mind? She met someone at work, he said. My ex-wife. It wasn't... She didn't do it maliciously. I think she was unhappy for a while before that, and the other person just clarified it for her. He ate the last of his toast. We figured out the co-parenting eventually. It took about a year to stop being really bad at it. Now it's okay. Not seamless, but okay. That's more honest than most people are about that situation. I had a therapist who was very insistent about honest language, he said. She told me that euphemisms are a form of debt you take on against yourself. I didn't fully understand that until about 6 months later. Mara laughed quietly. That's actually a good line. She charged $180 an hour. She'd better have good lines. He gathered the plates without being asked, carried them to the sink. He didn't wash them. That felt like too much presumption. But he rinsed them and stacked them, which seemed right. I'm going to leave my number, he said, coming back to the table. He picked up the pen that was lying near a stack of mail and wrote it on the corner of a piece of paper that appeared to be a grocery list. I don't know if that's... I just thought if there's anything with the apartment, any legal stuff, I have a friend who does tenant law. You don't have to do that, she said. I know. He hesitated. I had a good conversation last night. That's not something that happens very often, not for me anyway. She looked at the piece of paper. She didn't say anything for a moment. I'll text you, she said. So you have mine. She did it right then, picked up her phone from the counter and sent him a text that said only Mara, and his phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. He put the jacket on. He picked up the box from the table and then stood there for a moment, holding it. 11 pounds. I don't know what to do with this, he admitted. Mara looked at it. Leave it. I'll figure out something. You sure? She left me with a half-empty apartment and 4 months of lease to figure out, Mara said. She can deal with one box. He set it back down on the table. Take care of yourself, he said. You too, she said. And then, tell your daughter hi from the nurse who thinks cilantro tastes like dish soap. He laughed. That involuntary, genuine kind again. And then he let himself out. The subway home smelled like wet clothes, and everybody on it looked like they'd made questionable decisions the night before, which made Daniel feel moderately better about himself. He found a seat and put in his earbuds and didn't listen to anything, just sat with the quiet inside the noise of the train. He thought about Mara's face when she'd said she just didn't think about me very much. The flatness of it. Not self-pity, not anger. Just the particular settled sadness of someone who has arrived at an accurate conclusion about something that hurt to arrive at. He knew that look. He'd had it himself, probably, without realizing. In the mirror, in the 3 weeks since Vivian's phone call. That moment when the story you've been constructing to explain someone's behavior toward you finally stops being more believable than the simpler explanation. He got off at his stop and walked the 4 blocks home in the leftover rain. The sidewalk still wet and gleaming, and let himself into his apartment. He stood in the kitchen for a moment. His kitchen, which was disorganized in the way of a single parent who cooked actual meals but never quite got around to the organizational system he kept meaning to implement, with Maya's drawings magneted to the fridge and a collection of half-used hot sauces on the counter, and a small shoe by the back door that belonged to no one in his household, because Maya had left it there 6 weeks ago and he hadn't asked whose it was yet. He looked at all of it and felt something he didn't immediately have a word for. Not happiness, exactly. Warmth, maybe. The reassurance of a space that was genuinely his, genuinely lived in, with the specific chaos of a life that contained a 7-year-old girl with opinions about everything. He called his sister. He lives, Denise said. I got caught in the storm. I'm sorry. Maya's fine. She watched a movie last night and fell asleep on the couch. So you can tell her she's not uniquely bad at following rules. I appreciate that. He paused. I'll come get her in an hour. I need to shower and change before work. Take your time. A pause. You okay? There was the question again. 2 people in 12 hours. Yeah, he said. Actually, yeah, I think so. You sound different. Different how? Less Denise seemed to search for it. Less like you've been carrying something heavy. He stood in his kitchen and thought about that. Maybe I'm just tired, he said. Maybe, Denise said, in the tone she used when she didn't believe something but wasn't going to push it. The Brownstone Project in Carroll Gardens was a 19th century row house that had gone through roughly 4 decades of modifications that ranged from misguided to actively hostile to its original character. Daniel spent the morning in the basement, where a previous owner had covered original brick with a kind of synthetic paneling that had to come down before they could assess the structural work needed behind it. His crew was a core 3, himself, Marco, who did the masonry, and a younger guy named Pete who was still learning but was careful, which Daniel valued more than speed. They pulled paneling for 3 hours. Behind it, the brick was mostly intact, which was better than he'd hoped. There were sections that needed repointing. A section near the east wall where moisture had been working for years, probably since the paneling went up and trapped everything. He ran his hand along the affected area, feeling it, reading it, and thought about what it would take. He liked this part of the work in a way that he found hard to explain to people who didn't do it. The assessment. The moment before you made any decisions, when you were just reading the building, understanding what it had been through and what it still had in it. Buildings that had been poorly treated for a long time weren't ruined. Not usually. They were just patient. They were waiting for someone to pay attention to what was actually there rather than what it looked like on the surface. He was aware, around noon, that he was thinking about something besides the building. He and Mara hadn't talked about anything approaching. Anything. It hadn't been like that. It had been 2 people in a kitchen, grounded by shared disorientation, talking honestly because the hour and the storm and the situation made pretense feel like too much work. That was all it was. He ate lunch on the front stoop, a sandwich from the place 2 blocks over, bad coffee from the cart, and checked his phone for no reason that he was willing to name directly to himself. There was a text from his ex-wife, Jess, about Maya's school calendar. There was a text from Marco asking about the lumber delivery. There was nothing from a number he'd had for less than 12 hours. He put his phone away and finished his sandwich. She texted at 4:17. Apparently Vivian didn't just strip the walls, she took the kitchen trash can. Who takes a trash can? He read it twice and then laughed, alone on a brownstone stoop in Carroll Gardens, loud enough that Pete looked up from where he was loading materials into the truck. He typed back, "The trash can is a power move. She wanted to make sure you knew she was thorough." The response came back in under a minute. "I have been walking around with a garbage bag hanging from the cabinet knob like a medieval peasant, and I genuinely cannot decide if this is funny or infuriating. Both," he typed. "Those aren't mutually exclusive." A pause, and then, "I found something else. Can I call you later?" Something in the phrasing made him sit up slightly. "Found what?" "Not over text. I don't know what it is yet. Tonight, after my shift maybe? Or tomorrow? Call whenever," he wrote back. "I'll pick up." He put the phone in his pocket and went back inside, and spent the next 3 hours doing structural assessment on the back wall with the particular distracted focus of a man who is pretending to concentrate. She called at 11:48. He was awake, had been, without quite admitting to himself that he was waiting, sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of water and Maya's school newsletter that he'd been reading the same paragraph of for 40 minutes. "Hey," he said. "Hi." Her voice was the voice of someone at the end of a 7 to 7 shift, compressed, a little flat, but not collapsed. "Are you awake?" I lost track of what time it was. "I'm up. What did you find?" He heard her exhale, the background noise of wherever she was, outside maybe, because he could hear a bit of city noise, the particular sound of an outer borough night. "I was going through some things today," she said, "looking for my copy of the lease, actually, because I wanted to understand what my actual situation was. And I found something in the kitchen drawer, the junk drawer, the one every apartment has." "Yeah." "There was a letter in there, in an envelope." A pause. "It's addressed to the landlord. It's in Vivian's handwriting. It's..." "Daniel, it's a notice of vacating, for both of us." He went still. "For both of you," he repeated. "For both tenants," Mara said, and her voice was doing something careful now, controlled in the way voices get when the person speaking is actively managing not to sound as alarmed as they are. She wrote it as if she had the authority to give notice on behalf of both of us, effective at the end of this month. End of this month. He did the calculation. That's 3 weeks from now. Yes. And you have 4 months left on the lease. Yes. Which is what makes this... I don't know if she actually sent this or if this is a draft or... She stopped. But if she sent it, Daniel, I don't know where I'm standing legally, and the landlord, he's not someone who gives benefit of the doubt. He's the kind of landlord who hires someone to find reasons. Daniel was quiet for a moment. He was thinking. Can you take a picture of the letter and send it to me? Yeah, I can do that. And do you still have your original lease? Your copy? I'm looking for it. I tore through the drawer when I found this, and I needed to call someone. A pause, smaller than the others. I called you. He noticed that, the specific way she said it, not as a statement of dependence, just as a plain fact, slightly bewildered by itself. I'm glad you did, he said. Find the lease. Take a photo of the letter tonight, and take a photo of the envelope too if it's still there. Don't throw anything away, and don't do anything about it until I talk to my friend. The tenant law person. Yeah, her name is Renata. She's good. He paused. Mara, this is fixable. Even if the letter was sent, a tenant can't give notice on behalf of another tenant. Vivian doesn't have that authority. I know that logically. Her voice had a slight shake in it now, not panic, more like the shake that comes after the adrenaline starts wearing off, when the body recognizes it can stop bracing. I came home from a 12-hour shift and I found a letter in my own kitchen drawer that says I'm supposed to be gone in 3 weeks, and I didn't... She stopped. I didn't know I could even be blindsided at this point. I thought I'd processed everything. There's always another layer, he said, not comfortingly, just because it was true and he thought she'd prefer the true version. That's a terrible thing to say, she said. I know, sorry. No, it actually helped. I don't know why. She laughed once, brief and a little ragged. Okay, I'll find the lease. I'll take pictures of everything tonight. Good. He paused. You said you worked a 12-hour shift. Have you eaten anything? A silence. Mara. I had half a granola bar at like 9, she said. That's not eating. It's a very complete granola bar. It has oats. Eat something when you get inside, he said. Even toast. Just eat something. Another silence, shorter. Okay, she said, quieter than the rest of it. And send me those photos. I will. He sat at the kitchen table after they hung up, the city outside doing its late-night thing, and thought about a woman who had ended 2 separate relationships, with a boyfriend and with a roommate, and had apparently decided, somewhere in the cold mechanics of her planning, that she had the right to manage both exits simultaneously, quietly, efficiently, without announcing herself. He thought about Mara coming home exhausted from a night of handling other people's emergencies, reaching into a junk drawer for something ordinary, and finding instead a letter that redrew the boundaries of her life without her knowledge or consent. He thought about the way Mara had said, I called you, the slight bewilderment in it, like she wasn't entirely sure when that had become a thing she'd do, but there it was. The photos came through at 12:33. He looked at them carefully. The letter in Vivian's precise, slanted handwriting, the envelope, the lease that Mara had found underneath a collection of takeout menus in the back of a different drawer. He read the letter twice. It was thorough. That was the word that came to him, the same word Mara had used about the trash can, and there was something almost absurd about applying it to this. She was thorough. As if thoroughness were a neutral quality, rather than, in this particular case, a form of violence. Vivian had written it as a joint notice, had signed it with a loose interpretation of her own authority, had given 60 days notice from a date that had already passed by 2 weeks. If it had been submitted, and if the landlord had accepted it without question, Mara could already be in a legally ambiguous situation that a motivated landlord could exploit. He forwarded the photos to Renata with a brief message explaining the situation. It was past midnight, but Renata kept odd hours, and more importantly, she owed him a favor from a job he'd done on her family's brownstone in Park Slope 2 years ago at a significant discount. Then he sat there for another few minutes, in his kitchen, in his quiet apartment, with Maya asleep in the next room. He thought about what Mara had said the night before. We weren't people she was in relationship with. We were people who were useful to her life in specific ways. He looked at the photos of the letter on his phone. The controlled, careful handwriting, the complete absence, in the language of it, of any acknowledgement that another person's life was attached to what she was writing. He thought about the photo strip in the box on Mara's kitchen table. The October afternoon, the rain, the booth. The version of Vivian who had laughed in that booth, genuinely laughed, head back, the way she almost never let herself. He thought, that person was real. He wasn't wrong about that. But real wasn't the same as available. Real wasn't the same as choosing to be present for someone else's reality. And understanding that, actually understanding it, in the bones, was different from knowing it intellectually, which he had known for a while now. He turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. Renata had replied by the time he woke up, "This is a mess. Call me in the morning." She had no standing to submit this. "We can fix it, but we need to move before the landlord acts on anything." He read it twice, then put the phone face down on the nightstand and lay there for another minute, listening to the particular quiet of his apartment before Maya woke up. The hum of the refrigerator, a car passing outside, the building settling, all the small ordinary sounds of a life that was, despite everything, still standing. Renata Voss was the kind of lawyer who made other lawyers nervous, not because she was aggressive, but because she was precise. She had the particular gift of making complex legal situations sound very simple, and making people who had tried to exploit complexity feel genuinely stupid about it. Daniel had known her for 5 years. She'd helped him navigate a contractor dispute early in his business that would have otherwise cost him a significant amount of money and possibly the company itself. She was small, direct, and had a way of looking at documents that reminded him of the way he looked at damaged walls. Not at what was there, but at what the damage revealed about what had happened. She called him at 7:42 while he was making Maya's breakfast. "Okay," she said without preamble, "I read through everything. The letter is garbage, legally speaking. A co-tenant cannot unilaterally submit a vacate notice on behalf of another tenant, full stop. It doesn't matter what she signed or how she worded it. Your friend's tenancy is not affected by this letter." "But if the landlord acts on it," Daniel said, "then he's exposed to a wrongful eviction claim, which in this state carries real teeth." A pause. "The question is whether he's already acted on it. Has your friend heard from him directly?" "Not yet. She found the letter last night." "Then she needs to get ahead of it. She needs to send a written notice to the landlord today, certified mail, email, both, stating clearly that she did not authorize this letter, that she has not vacated and does not intend to vacate, and that her tenancy remains valid under the existing lease." Another pause. "I can draft that for her. Give me an hour." "Renata, I know, you did my parents' house. I did your parents' house at cost," he said, "and I got you out of that contractor mess, so we're actually even, but fine. I'll draft the letter." He put the phone down and looked at Maya, who was sitting at the table with her cereal, watching him with the attentive, slightly solemn expression she got when she understood that something was happening without knowing exactly what. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah." He poured her juice "Eat your breakfast." "You said that already." "I meant it both times." She considered this philosophically and went back to her cereal. He texted Mara. "Talk to Renata. Letter has no legal standing. She's drafting something for you to send the landlord today. Don't contact him before you have it." The response took 4 minutes, which probably meant she'd been asleep. "I have a shift tonight, but I'm up. Thank you." Then, a minute later, "I keep thinking she planned this. Not impulsively. She thought about it and decided this was the way to do it." He stared at that for a moment, then typed, "I know. We'll talk about it. Get the letter sent first. Us." He dropped Maya at school. She got out of the car, took 3 steps, turned around and came back to the window. "Daddy?" "Yeah." "Are you sure you're okay?" He looked at his daughter, who had her mother's directness and his stubbornness and some third quality that belonged entirely to herself, a kind of careful, watchful attention to the people around her that sometimes made him feel thoroughly seen in ways he wasn't always ready for. "I'm working on it," he said, because she was 7 and she deserved honest over reassuring, and also because she would know the difference. She seemed to think about that. "Okay," she said finally, like she was filing it under things to monitor. Then she turned and went into school. He sat in the car for a moment after, working on it. That was the truth. As near as he could tell. Not collapsed, not fine. Working on it. What? Renata's draft arrived at 9:15, and it was, as expected, clean and unambiguous. Daniel forwarded it to Mara with a brief explanation of each section, translated out of legal language into plain English, because he thought she deserved to understand exactly what she was sending and why. She called him at 10. "I read it," she said. "I'm going to send it." A pause. "I looked up the landlord. His name is Gerald Fitch. He's had 3 housing court cases in the last 4 years. All 3 were resolved against tenants," Daniel said. He'd looked 2 earlier that morning, but 2 of those were legitimate non-payment situations. The third one is the one I'd pay attention to. Tenant claimed he accepted a vacate notice that was disputed, used it to accelerate a turnover before the lease was up. Silence. "So he's done something like this before," Mara said. "Maybe. That case settled, so there's no full ruling. But," he paused, "I think you need to send this letter today. Not this afternoon. This morning. I'm sending it right now." He heard the sound of her at a keyboard. "Email first, then I'll go to the post office before my shift." A pause. "Daniel, what if he already filed something? What if Vivian sent that letter weeks ago?" It was a legitimate question, and he didn't have a clean answer for it. "Then Renata deals with it. But we have the original in your junk drawer. We have the lease. We have your documented residency. You're in a strong position legally, Mara. The disadvantage is that you don't know his timeline. So I'm reacting instead of moving first. You're moving now. That's what matters." She exhaled. "Okay. Then, I want to know when she sent it. If she sent it. I want to know exactly what she set up and when she decided to." "I know. Does that seem obsessive to you, that I need to know the timeline?" He thought about it honestly. "No. It seems like a reasonable response to finding out someone mapped out your exit from your own home without mentioning it to you." "I keep going back to the timing," she said. "She texted me about the lease 2 weeks ago, right? After she'd already been gone for a few days. But if she wrote this letter before she left, then that text wasn't a heads up, it was just cover." "Yeah," Daniel said. "I think that's right." "She wanted to look like she'd communicated," Mara said. Her voice was flat in the way that usually preceded something sharper. "She sent me one text saying she was transitioning living situations, and she thought that covered it. And meanwhile, she'd already submitted a letter to the landlord on my behalf." Allegedly submitted. "If she didn't submit it, why is it in the drawer?" He didn't have a good answer for that either. "Send the email," he said. Okay. The letter went out at 10:27, certified email with red receipt, and Mara took a photo of it and sent it to Daniel before she went to the post office. He was on the job site by then, but he checked his phone on the front stoop of the Carroll Gardens brownstone and felt something loosen slightly in his chest when he saw it. Marco appeared in the doorway behind him. "You good?" "Yeah, sorry." He pocketed the phone. "How's the east wall looking?" "Better than I thought," Marco said. "Worse than you hoped." "Story of my life," Daniel said, and went back inside. Gerald Fitch called Mara at 2 in the afternoon. She was home between the post office and getting ready for her shift, and she almost didn't pick up the unfamiliar number. And then she thought about Daniel's advice about moving first and answered it. Fitch's voice was the voice of a man who had spent decades in a business that required him to be superficially reasonable while pursuing outcomes that were not. He was friendly in the way that comes without warmth, the professional friendliness of someone who has learned that being openly aggressive is less effective than being pleasant while holding something over you. "Miss Ellison," he said, "I got your message this morning." "Good," she said. She'd propped herself against the kitchen counter, the same spot she'd stood in when Daniel had first shown up at her door with a box and a tired face, and the familiarity of it felt steadying. "Then you understand my position." "I do," Fitch said. "And I want to be helpful here. I think there may have been some miscommunication." "I'd like to be precise about it," Mara said, and she heard herself and was mildly surprised by how steady she sounded. 12-hour shifts in an ER, she supposed, had calibrated her internal gauge for actual crisis versus merely uncomfortable situations. "The letter you received was submitted without my knowledge or authorization. I didn't sign it. I wasn't told it was being sent. My tenancy under the existing lease is valid and current." A pause on Fitch's end. "Well," he said, and the friendliness had shifted by a degree or two, "the letter I received did indicate a joint agreement to vacate." "It indicated no such thing," Mara said. "A co-tenant doesn't have the authority to vacate on behalf of another tenant. I'm sure you know that." Another pause. "I'm not looking to make this difficult," Fitch said, and the word difficult arrived with a particular weight, the weight of a word that is technically neutral and is being used as a mild threat. "I'm not either," Mara said. "I'm looking to stay in the apartment I have a lease for until that lease ends. That's the entirety of my position." She paused. "If there's any confusion about the legal standing of the notice you received, I'm happy to have my attorney reach out directly." She did not have an attorney. She had Renata's email address, which Renata had given Daniel, who had given it to her, which was close enough for this conversation. The silence that followed was the particular silence of someone recalibrating. "I think we can probably work this out without involving attorneys," Fitch said, and the warmth had come back, but it was thinner now. "I hope so," Mara said. "I'll follow up in writing after this call." And she ended it before he could respond. She stood in the kitchen for a moment with her phone pressed against her sternum, eyes closed, breathing. Her hands were not quite steady, but they weren't bad either, better than she'd expected. She called Daniel. "He called," she said when he picked up. "What did he say?" She walked him through it. She heard him listening in the careful way she'd started to recognize, attentive, quiet, letting her finish without inserting himself into it. "He backed down," Daniel said when she was done. "For now." "For now," he agreed. "But that's the right move. He's testing whether you know your rights. The moment you demonstrate that you do, the calculation changes." A pause. "You did good." She was aware of a small, involuntary warmth at that, not because she needed the validation. She was 30 years old. She knew she'd handled it correctly. She'd felt it in the call. But because there was something different about being told you did good by someone who knew what it had cost. Daniel had understood what the call represented. He'd understood that she'd walked into it alone after one sleepless night and a 12-hour shift and a morning of reading legal language. And he said you did good in the tone of someone who meant it as a plain statement of fact rather than encouragement packaging. "Are you going to be okay tonight?" he asked. "At work?" "I'm always okay at work," she said. "Work is the thing I know how to do." "Yeah." A pause. "I know what that's like." "I'll text you after." "Okay." She stood in the kitchen for another minute after hanging up, in the apartment that still felt stripped and strange, the bare walls and the empty shelves and the particular silence of a space that had been lived in by someone who was now entirely gone. She looked at the junk drawer, still slightly open from when she'd found the letter. She thought about Vivian sitting at this table, the board meeting conversation she'd told Daniel about, the 3 minutes of visible human feeling before the phone call, before the filing away. She thought about the letter in Vivian's handwriting, careful and slanted, addressing the landlord with total authority over a situation she had no right to determine alone. She thought, I don't think she considered what it would feel like to find that letter. And then, more quietly, under that, I don't think she considered me at all. Not malice. Something almost worse. A kind of thorough, organized, administrative not considering. The way you don't consider the preferences of objects you're rearranging. She pushed the drawer closed. Got ready for her shift. The next few days settled into a rhythm that was unusual in the specific way that unusual things become usual quickly when they meet a need. Daniel and Mara texted, not constantly, he had a job site and she had 12-hour shifts, but consistently, in the way of two people who have established that the other one is worth checking in on. He sent her a photo of the original brick wall in Carroll Gardens after they finished clearing the paneling, a long section of intact 19th century brickwork, the kind of thing that had been hidden behind synthetic material for 40 years and had waited patiently for someone to pay attention to it. She responded, "That's genuinely beautiful." She sent him a photo of the granola bar she had packed for her shift, ostentatiously placed next to an actual sandwich and an apple. He responded, "I retract all previous concerns." She responded, "You'd better." On the third day, Renata sent a formal letter to Fitch's management company, copied to Mara, outlining the legal standing of her tenancy and noting that the vacate notice had no legal force. Fitch did not respond. Renata said no news was the right news for now. On the fourth day, Daniel called instead of texted, at 9 in the evening, because Maya was at her mom's for the night and the apartment was quiet, and he'd picked up the phone before fully deciding to. "Hi," Mara said. She was between shifts, a rare evening off, she'd mentioned. "What are you doing?" "Watching television," she said. "Badly. I keep falling asleep." "What are you watching?" "I don't know anymore. I woke up and it was something about fishing competitions. I think I started with a documentary about architecture and it escalated somehow." He laughed. "That's quite a journey." "It's been a long week." "Yeah." He was quiet for a moment, comfortable in it. "How's the apartment? Are you okay there?" "It's getting more normal," she said after a pause that felt honest. "I put some stuff on the shelves, books I had in boxes. It looks less institutional now." Another pause. "I found a print at a place on Atlantic Avenue. Nothing special, just something for the wall so it's not so bare." "What is it?" "A photograph. A bridge, actually. Which is, I know, given the whole—" She stopped. He understood immediately. Vivian's print had been a bridge. He'd thought about it a few times since, that detail. "It's different," Mara said, a little defensively. "It's a different bridge, and it's mine. I picked it." "I know," he said. "It's different. Put it up." A brief quiet. "I'm going to," she said. "I already put a nail in the wall and everything. I just haven't hung it yet." "What's stopping you?" She didn't answer immediately. "I'm not sure," she said finally. "Maybe it's... Once I put it up, the apartment is mine again. Not ours in that weird way where someone else left their life all over it. Just mine." A pause. "And that's good. I know it's good. It just also means it's over," he said. "Yeah." He sat with that. "I put the box in my car," he said. "I was going to drop it somewhere, a donation place. But it's still in the trunk." "The box." "Yeah." "The photo strip is in it," she said. Not quite a question. "Yeah." Another quiet, this one with a slightly different texture, the kind of quiet that isn't empty. "I think you should throw it away," she said. "The photo strip. Not donate it, just throw it away." "Yeah?" "Not because she was terrible," Mara said slowly. "Because it doesn't need to be somewhere. It doesn't need to be preserved. You don't need to have it, and you don't need to give it away to someone who will wonder about it. You can just let it be gone." He thought about the October afternoon, the rain, the booth, the laugh he'd thought was real. Which it was. It was real. He still believed that. It was just insufficient. It was real, and it wasn't enough. And those two things were both true at once, and you could hold both of them and still let the photo go. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. They kept talking, loose and wandering, through a subject list that included the Carroll Gardens project, the nursing shortage in New York, which she had strong feelings about, and the questionable decision by whoever had designed his neighborhood's new coffee shop to install only bar-height seating, which was, he maintained, actively hostile to the human body. "It's an aesthetic choice," she said. "They want a certain atmosphere. They want an atmosphere where no one can sit for more than 20 minutes without their lower back staging a protest. That's possibly the point, turnover. Then serve worse coffee, don't torture people." She was laughing, the real kind, the one he'd first heard in the kitchen when he'd said he fell asleep standing up once on a job site. It was a specific laugh, not contained, not performed. It happened when something caught her genuinely off guard. He realized, sitting in his quiet apartment with his phone warm in his hand, that he was aware of the specific register of her laugh, the way you become aware of something only after you've heard it enough times to start anticipating it. He filed that away without looking at it directly. It was past 11 when they stopped. Not because either of them wanted to, it was the natural end of the conversation, the point where it rounded itself off. She had work the next morning, and he had an early delivery at the job site. "Daniel," she said just before the end. "Yeah. Thank you for all of it. The lawyer, the texts, the phone calls." She paused. "You didn't have to." "I know," he said. "I wanted to." That sat there between them, not requiring anything. "Good night," she said. "Good night, Mara." He put the phone down and sat for a moment in the quiet of the apartment. He thought about the bridge print still unhung on Mara's wall, the nail already in the plaster, waiting. He thought about his own walls, which had photos of Maya and a few pieces he'd picked up over the years, and the specific way his apartment looked like the accumulation of a life that had kept going even when he wasn't sure it would. He thought about Vivian's letter in the junk drawer, the careful slanted handwriting, the thorough and complete absence of Mara from its consideration. He thought about the 3 weeks since the phone call in which he'd been quietly waiting for the grief to arrive in a form he recognized, the dramatic kind, the kind with weight and shape, and how instead it had arrived as something flatter. Not loss exactly, but the end of a sustained effort, the feeling of muscles you'd been clenching finally going slack. He thought about what Mara had said. "Once I put it up, the apartment is mine again." The thing about that was you had to get to that point first. You had to go through the finding of the letter and the calling of the landlord and the texting to someone at midnight and all the rest of it. You couldn't just decide to be on the other side of it. He went to the kitchen, found the paper bag he used for recycling, and made a mental note to take the box out of his car tomorrow morning. Not tomorrow. Now. He got his keys. The building's recycling area was in the basement, and at 11:30 at night it was empty and fluorescent lit, and it smelled like cardboard and the faint ghost of someone's cooking from one of the lower floors. He opened the box on top of the recycling bin and took everything out. The charger, the hardback, the scarf, the face serum. He set them on the edge of the bin, items that could be donated or left for whoever wanted them. Then he picked up the photo strip. He looked at it. October. The rain outside the booth, the curtain slightly crooked. 2 people in a specific moment that was real when it happened and insufficient in the long view, and now over. Both things still true. He let it go into the bin. He left the box down there too, the cardboard folded flat. He went back upstairs. He washed his hands, which was not a metaphor. He just wanted to wash his hands. He went to bed. He slept better than he had in 3 weeks, which was not nothing. He was on the job site the next morning when his phone rang and he didn't recognize the number. He almost didn't answer. He was in the middle of something with the masonry crew, but he stepped outside and picked up. "Is this Daniel Mercer?" A woman's voice, professional and crisp. "Yeah. My name is Sandra Okafor. I'm the property manager for the building at..." And she gave the address of Vivian's building, Mara's building. "I'm calling regarding apartment 4C. He went still. "What about it?" "We received a formal vacate notice some weeks ago for both tenants of that unit," the woman said. "We've since received a letter disputing that notice from one of the tenants, but I wanted to speak directly with the other named party, yourself, to understand the situation." Daniel stood on the stoop of the Carroll Gardens brownstone and felt the ground shift slightly under the conversation. "I'm sorry," he said carefully. "You said both tenants." "Yes. The notice we received listed the names of both tenants, Mara Ellison and Daniel Mercer." He was quiet for a moment, just processing it. "I don't live in that apartment," he said. "I've never lived in that apartment. I have no tenancy there." A pause. "I see," the woman said, and he could hear the recalibration in her voice. "The notice indicated, I don't know what the notice indicated," he said steadily. "But I am not, and have never been a tenant at that address. Whoever submitted that notice added my name without my knowledge." He paused. "I'd like a copy of the notice you received." Another pause. I'll have to check with Mr. Fitch about that, she said. Tell Mr. Fitch, Daniel said, and he kept his voice flat and controlled, that I'm going to want that copy. And tell him I know a tenant rights attorney who will be very interested in reviewing it. He ended the call and stood on the stoop for a moment, the morning traffic of Carroll Gardens going past, the unremarkable ordinary noise of the city doing what it did. Vivian had put his name on the letter. He stood with that. She'd put his name on a formal vacate notice for an apartment he didn't live in, submitted it to a landlord she knew by name, and had done it deliberately because adding a name added authority, because two parties vacating was cleaner than one, because it completed the architecture of the exit she'd designed. She'd used his name, without asking, without telling him. The same way she'd used Mara's, the same way she'd used the lease agreement, the same way she'd used the leverage of a friendly landlord with a documented history of moving on advantageous situations. He called Mara. She picked up on the second ring. Hey! She put my name on it, he said. Silence. What? The property manager just called me. The vacate notice listed both tenants of 4C Mara Ellison and Daniel Mercer. He heard Mara's breath on the other end of the line, a long pause. You don't live here, she said. No. She listed you as a tenant of this apartment. Yes. Daniel? And there was something in her voice now. Not just anger, which was there, but something harder underneath it. The specific register of someone arriving at a conclusion they'd been circling. She built a whole structure around this. She didn't just leave. She engineered it. Yeah, he said. I know. She used both of us, Mara said. Her voice was very quiet now. She used me for the tenancy, and she used you for the legitimacy of the notice. She needed two names to make it look like a joint decision, and she had two names available. The morning light fell on the stoop of the brownstone. Daniel looked at his hand on his phone. He thought about Vivian's precision, her thoroughness, her efficiency. He thought about how long she'd had to plan this, how many details she'd had to account for, and how nowhere in any of that planning had she appeared to consider, even briefly, what it would feel like to be on the receiving end of it. Call Renata, he said. Right now. Tell her everything. I am, Mara said. I'm calling her right now. A pause, just a breath. She is not going to get away with this. No, he said. She's not. Renata called back within the hour. Daniel was still on the Carroll Gardens stoop when his phone buzzed, and he waved Marco inside without him and stayed where he was, sitting on the front steps with the morning moving around him. Okay, Renata said, and she had the particular focus in her voice that meant she'd been thinking hard and fast. This is bigger than a landlord dispute. I know. Using someone's name on a legal document without their authorization is document fraud, Daniel. It doesn't matter that you weren't an active tenant. The notice was submitted to initiate a legal process, and it bore your name without your consent. That's not a technicality. That's a real exposure for her. He was quiet for a moment. What do we do with that? That depends on what you and Mara want to do with it. Renata paused. If you want to pursue this, I can draft a formal demand letter to Vivian directly, documenting the unauthorized use of both your names, the fraudulent notice, the attempt to accelerate an illegal eviction. That creates a paper record. It puts her on notice that you know exactly what she did. And if she ignores it, then you have options. Civil claim for damages. Mara's the stronger plaintiff there, given she actually lives in the apartment, but your name on that document is clean standing for you too. Another pause. I'll be honest with you. Most people in this situation, they get the letter, they confirm their tenancy is protected, they move on. They don't go after the person. But most people don't have their name forged on a legal document by someone who dated them for 8 months and then disappeared. He looked at the street. A woman walked past with a stroller, talking on the phone. A delivery bike wove through the parked cars. What does Mara want to do? Renata asked. I haven't had that conversation yet. I just called her 20 minutes ago. Have it, Renata said, and call me back. Whatever you two decide, I'll support it. But you need to be aligned because this has to come from both of you. He put the phone in his pocket and went inside to do actual work, because there was a structural issue on the second floor that needed his eyes and his judgment, and not the spinning machinery of everything else. And because sometimes the most useful thing a person can do is handle the thing directly in front of them. He told Marco he needed 2 hours, and then he went upstairs and looked at old timber and thought about load-bearing walls. And for 2 hours, that was enough. They met in person for the first time since the storm. That felt significant in a way he didn't fully examine. The fact that they'd built something real over texts and phone calls, and one very long kitchen conversation, and now they were meeting again with the specific weight of everything that had accumulated since. She was at a coffee shop on Flatbush, off shift for once in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, and she was already there when he arrived. She was in a dark green jacket he hadn't seen before, and her hair was down, and she had the faint shadow of recent sleep deprivation that he recognized from their first meeting because it apparently lived permanently around her eyes. She had a coffee, and she'd ordered one for him too, which he appreciated because it meant she'd been thinking about his arrival before he got there. "Hi," she said. "Hey." He sat across from her. The coffee shop was moderately full. Background noise, the clink of cups, someone nearby on a laptop. "You look tired." "Thank you," she said dryly. 6-day stretch. How was it? 3 car accidents, 1 stroke, 2 domestic situations, and a guy who genuinely believed he was having a heart attack because he ate too much at a family dinner. She paused. He was wrong about the heart attack, but his family dinner sounded legitimately alarming. He smiled at that. She smiled back, small and tired, and then it faded and they were back in the actual thing. "I talked to Renata," she said. "So did I. She thinks we should send Vivian a formal letter." "Yeah." He looked at his coffee. "What do you want to do?" Mara was quiet for a moment. She'd wrapped both hands around her cup, which he'd noticed she did when she was thinking seriously about something. "I keep asking myself why she did it the way she did it," she said. "The letter, using your name, all of it, and I keep coming back to the same answer, which is control." She said it simply, without drama. She needed the exit to go the way she'd planned it. She needed there not to be complications. And the cleanest way to ensure that was to make decisions for everyone else before they had a chance to make them for themselves. She looked up. She wasn't being cruel. She was being efficient. But the outcome is the same. Daniel nodded slowly. "When I was with her," he said, "she used to end arguments by reframing the whole thing, so I didn't know what position I'd started with. I thought it was a communication style. I thought maybe I was the one not being clear." He paused. But it was the same thing. She was managing the terms of every interaction so they came out the way she'd decided they should. "She managed your breakup," Mara said. "She decided when it happened, how it was delivered, what explanation you got. She managed my tenancy situation. And when she was done managing everything, she left, and both of us were just standing in the aftermath of decisions that had been made without us." He sat with that. "I want to send the letter," Mara said. "Not because I want to ruin her. I don't care about ruining her. I care about her knowing that someone saw exactly what she did and named it clearly." She paused. "She thinks we'll just absorb it. She thinks we'll be confused and upset and eventually give up and move on, because that's what people do when she manages them. But I want her to know that it didn't work, that we figured it out." "Okay," he said. "Okay? I'll call Renata. We'll send it." Mara looked at him for a moment. "You don't need to think about it more?" "I've been thinking about it all morning," he said. "You just said out loud exactly what I'd been thinking." He picked up his coffee. "She put my name on a document. I'd like her to know I noticed." Something in Mara's face settled, like a breath she'd been holding. "Good," she said. "That's good." They sat for a few minutes, the coffee shop noise around them, the ordinary afternoon going on outside the window. "There's something else," Mara said, and her tone shifted. Something more careful in it, more uncertain. "I found more in the drawer, after the letter." He looked up. "There were emails," she said, printed out. Which sounds strange, but Vivian sometimes printed things she wanted to reference. She had this habit of printing important emails and keeping them in folders. She wrapped her hands around the cup again. "These were loose. I think she meant to take them and forgot, or didn't think it mattered." What emails? Correspondence between her and Fitch, Mara said. Going back 3 months. Not about the vacate notice specifically. About the unit. He's been wanting to convert this building. He told her that if the 4th floor came vacant before December, he had a developer ready to move. Daniel put his cup down. So Fitch had a financial interest in her leaving before the lease ended, he said. Yes. And Vivian, Mara unzipped her jacket pocket and pulled out her phone, opened something, slid it across the table. In one of these emails, she tells him she's planning to vacate and she expects a smooth transition. And he responds saying he appreciates the cooperation and he'll make sure it's straightforward. Daniel looked at the phone. He read the email exchange slowly. It was professional in tone, careful in language, nothing that constituted explicit agreement to do anything illegal. But the shape of it was clear. Fitch had wanted the unit. Vivian had given him a timeline. Whatever came after was framed as a mutual understanding between two parties who each wanted the same outcome. He called her by her first name, Daniel said, reading. They knew each other. She introduced herself to him when she moved in. She mentioned it once, said she liked to have a direct line to the building owner. Mara paused. I thought at the time it was just her being organized. Now I think she was building a relationship with him so she'd have leverage later. Or so he'd have leverage to use when it suited them both. She wasn't thinking about me, Mara said, and this was the flat, settled version of it, not the raw one from the night of the phone call. She'd arrived at it, she'd processed it, she was looking at it steady now. She moved in here, she used this apartment, she paid her half of the rent on time every month for 14 months, and she never once, not once, Daniel, thought about what it would mean for me when she left. She planned this entire exit down to a conversation with the landlord, and she stopped. She just didn't include me in the calculus at all. He said nothing, because there was nothing useful to add to it. She was right, and they both knew she was right, and sometimes the right thing to do with a true thing is just let it be true in the room for a minute. I'm hanging the print, Mara said eventually. Good. Tonight, when I get home. I'm hanging it. Good, he said again. She picked up her coffee. You should see the apartment at some point. When it doesn't feel... She paused. When it feels like mine. I'd like that, he said. The afternoon light came through the window at a low angle, October stubborn and present, and Mara looked different in it than she had in the too-bright kitchen, less like someone mid-crisis, more like someone who'd moved through a crisis and was doing the work of figuring out what came next. Renata sent the letter to Vivian Hart on a Thursday morning, certified mail and email simultaneously, to the contact information Daniel had provided from his phone, her personal email, her company email, her last known address. The letter was 4 paragraphs, each one precise and unambiguous. It documented the unauthorized use of both Daniel's and Mara's names on the vacate notice. It cited the relevant tenant protection statutes. It detailed the fraudulent nature of the document as submitted. And it concluded by stating clearly that if any action was taken against Mara's tenancy on the basis of that notice, or if either Daniel or Mara suffered further harm from Vivian's unauthorized use of their identities in legal proceedings, they reserved all rights to pursue civil remedy. It did not threaten, it did not plead. It stated facts and consequences in the neutral, thorough language of someone who knows exactly what the law says and is not uncertain about where the lines are. Daniel read it through before Renata sent it. He thought about calling Vivian to warn her. He actually picked up his phone twice. Both times he put it down without dialing. He owed her a warning the same way she'd owed him an explanation when she ended things, which was to say he owed it as a matter of basic decency, but she had demonstrated that the account of basic decency between them had already been closed without his knowledge. The letter went out. 48 hours later, Vivian responded. Not to Daniel, not to Mara, to Renata, through an attorney of her own, a brief professional communication acknowledging receipt and indicating her client disputed certain characterizations in the letter. Renata forwarded it to Daniel with a one-line note, classic non-denial denial. She's not fighting it, she's stalling. This is good. Daniel forwarded it to Mara, who responded, disputed certain characterizations, as if she mischaracterized what her own handwriting says. He texted back, I think the correct legal term is caught. 3 dots appeared, then, is that a legal term? It is in the Renata School of Tenant Law, he wrote. A pause, then a laughing emoji, which Mara used rarely enough that it registered. 2 days after Vivian's attorney's letter, Fitch's management company sent a formal written acknowledgement to Mara confirming her tenancy under the existing lease, explicitly withdrawing any prior communication that suggested otherwise. It was bureaucratic and bloodless, and it arrived with no explanation of what had prompted it, which meant Fitch had talked to someone who had explained to him exactly what his exposure looked like. Mara called Daniel when she got it. "It's over," she said. Not triumphantly. More like someone setting something down that had been heavy. "Yeah," he said. "It is. I can't believe that's it." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. More." A pause. "She built this whole architecture. The relationship with Fitch, the letter, the timeline, adding your name, all of it so careful, and then it just falls apart when someone looks at it directly," Daniel said. "That's what happens with things built to avoid scrutiny. They're not built to withstand it." She was quiet for a moment. "That's a very restoration project manager thing to say." "Buildings and people are not that different," he said, and then felt slightly embarrassed by that and added, "That sounded more profound in my head." "No," she said, It actually works." He brought Maya to the park that Saturday. It was a good day for it, the kind of late October afternoon that remembers summer without committing to it. Warm enough in the sun, the light doing something particular to everything it touched. Maya wanted to be on the swings, and then she wanted to look at the dogs, and then she wanted to explain to Daniel in significant detail the complex social dynamics of her second-grade class, which he listened to with genuine attention because the social dynamics of second grade were not actually that different from those of adult life, just with fewer euphemisms. "Daddy," she said, midway through a climbing structure. "Who's Mara?" He looked up. "What?" "You said her name last week. You were on the phone and you said, 'Okay, Mara,' and then you laughed." He stood at the base of the climbing structure, holding her jacket. "She's a friend," he said. Maya considered this from her position 6 feet up. "A new friend?" "Yeah, pretty new." "From work?" "No, just... I met her." He paused. "She's a nurse." "Does she work at a hospital?" "She does." "My friend Sophia's dad is a doctor," Maya said, and then moved on to another part of the structure with the unnerving agility of the 7-year-old metabolism, apparently satisfied with the information. He stood there with her jacket and thought about the fact that his daughter had noticed the name, had cataloged it, filed it. He'd been thinking about Mara with an increasing frequency that he was aware of and had been treating carefully, the way you treat something fragile that you're not sure the status of, not ignoring it. He wasn't built for ignoring things, never had been, but not rushing it either. There was a difference between the warmth he felt when her name showed up on his phone and the question of what to do about it. And he was a man who had learned from expensive experience to let those two things exist separately for a while before bringing them together. She'd been through something in the last 2 weeks that had required a significant portion of her energy and emotional resources. So had he. The timing of meeting someone in the middle of a crisis was not automatically disqualifying, but it required a certain honesty about what you were responding to and what would still be there once the crisis resolved. He thought, the crisis is resolving. Fitch has confirmed her tenancy. Vivian's attorney has responded. The ground is more stable. He thought, what's still there is still there. Maya came down the slide and crashed into his legs, which was her preferred method of landing. "Can we get hot chocolate?" she said. "There's a cart by the south entrance," he said. "With marshmallows?" "I cannot confirm the marshmallow situation from this distance." She grabbed his hand and pulled him in the direction of the south entrance with the absolute certainty of someone who has decided what's happening next. He let himself be pulled. Ball. He texted Mara that evening. "How's the print?" The response came back immediately, which meant she was awake and not at work. She sent a photo. The bridge print hung on the wall above the couch, a black and white photograph of a bridge in winter, bare trees on the bank, water below. Clean framing, a little spare. It looked right against the wall. "Looks good," he typed. "It does," she wrote. "It took me 45 minutes to get it level, and I still don't think it's exactly level, but I'm choosing to believe it is. That's the correct approach to hanging art. Is it crooked? He looked at the photo again. It was possibly slightly crooked, maybe a degree. No, he wrote. You're lying. A little. I knew it. He smiled at his phone in the kitchen, alone in the apartment, and thought about the fact that smiling at his phone was something he'd been doing with some regularity, and that this was, on balance, a good thing. I want to ask you something, he typed, and then stopped. Started again. There's a place in Red Hook I've been wanting to try. Food is supposed to be good. Would you want to? He looked at it, deleted the last part, then rewrote it. Would you want to come? He sent it before he could think more about it. He washed a glass that didn't need washing, checked the time on the microwave, looked at his phone. The response came after 3 minutes, which was long enough that he became aware of the waiting, and then, yes. And then a few seconds later, when? He exhaled slowly. Saturday? He typed. Saturday works, she wrote. A pause, and then, Daniel. Yeah. I want to say it out loud. This is a dinner, right? Not a let's figure out the lease thing. He appreciated that. The directness of it. The willingness to name the thing rather than let it stay ambiguous and safe. It's a dinner, he confirmed. Not a lease thing. Okay, she wrote. Good. Saturday. He put his phone down on the counter and stood in his kitchen for a moment, in the particular warm quiet of an apartment that was his, that had his daughter's drawings on the fridge and his disorganized collection of hot sauces and one small shoe by the back door belonging to a mystery child, and felt, not happiness exactly, not the clean TV movie version of it, but something adjacent and real. The feeling of a person standing in their own life and finding it livable. Finding it, in fact, more than that. He thought about what Mara had said in the coffee shop. She used both of us. She had. She'd moved through both of their lives and used what she needed and left without looking back. And her exit, so carefully planned, so thoroughly arranged, had brought them into the same apartment on a rainy night with a box of her belongings, and she'd had no way of accounting for that. In all her efficiency, in all her management of the variables, she hadn't considered what would happen if the two people she'd been handling compared notes. She hadn't considered them at all. He found himself thinking about this without anger, which surprised him a little. Not with warmth toward Vivian, exactly, but with something more like the detached recognition of someone who has finished the last chapter of a book and can see now how it was always going to end. She'd built an exit designed to leave no loose ends, and it had instead created a thread between two people she'd used and discarded. That seemed about right. He went to check on Maya, who was asleep in the way only small children and the truly untroubled can sleep. Completely, with her whole body, one arm thrown off the side of the bed, and her face smashed comfortably into the pillow. He stood in the doorway for a moment and just looked at her. He thought about the question she'd asked him twice now. Are you okay, Daddy? He was okay. He was more than okay. He was standing in the doorway of his daughter's room on a Saturday night in October, and there was a dinner on Saturday, and there was a brownstone in Carroll Gardens that was going to be beautiful when they were done with it. And the woman who had quietly tried to arrange his life without him had received a letter from an attorney who charged a reasonable rate and had excellent lines. He pulled Maya's arm back onto the bed. She didn't wake up. He went back to the kitchen and stood at the window and looked at the city, which was doing what it always did, going on, noisily, indifferently, enormously. And he thought about a woman he'd met over a cardboard box in a storm-soaked apartment, and her real laugh, and the way she'd asked this as a dinner, right? Because she was someone who would rather be honest than safe. He thought, yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly what it is. The city went on outside the window. The apartment was quiet around him. His daughter slept in the next room. He made himself a cup of tea he didn't really need, just to have something in his hands, and stood at the window a while longer, watching the lights. The restaurant in Red Hook was the kind of place that didn't try very hard to look like it wasn't trying hard. Exposed brick, mismatched chairs, a chalkboard menu with things crossed off and rewritten, the smell of something braised and serious coming from the kitchen. It was a Wednesday, not a Saturday, because Mara had picked up an extra shift on the weekend and Daniel had said Wednesday worked just as well. And it did. She was already there when he arrived, which was becoming a pattern. She was in a gray sweater and her hair was down, and she had a glass of red wine in front of her that she'd been nursing. And when she saw him come through the door, she raised a hand in a small wave. Just a lift of 2 fingers, nothing performed about it. He sat across from her. "You're early," he said. "I got off shift at 4, she said. "I went home, showered, realized I had 2 hours to kill, and walked here in 40 minutes. She looked at the wine. "Then I sat here and had a mild internal debate about whether ordering wine before you arrived made me look—" "It doesn't," he said. "You don't know what I was going to say." "Eager," he said. "And it doesn't. It makes you look like someone who wanted wine." She smiled at that. A waiter appeared and Daniel ordered a beer, and they spent a few minutes on the menu in the comfortable way of people who aren't performing indecision, just actually deciding. When the waiter left, she looked at him directly. "How's the brownstone?" "Getting there," he said. "We finished the masonry on the 2nd floor this week. There's a staircase that needs significant work. The treads are original, which is good, but someone in the 90s painted them white over dark walnut, so there's about a week of stripping ahead of us." "Is it worth it?" "The stripping." "Every time," he said. "There's always something real underneath." She nodded, and he thought she wasn't only thinking about the staircase. They ate well. The food was unpretentious and genuinely good. A lamb dish that had been cooking for a long time and tasted like it. Bread that wasn't fancy but was warm. A shared dessert at the end that neither of them had planned on, but the waiter described it and they looked at each other and the decision was made without discussion. The conversation moved the way good conversations do when you've already done the hard establishing work and can now just be in it. They talked about her hospital, about a patient she'd had that week who was 91 years old and had shown her a photograph he'd been carrying in his wallet for 70 years. They talked about Maya, who had recently become convinced that she had a genuine future as a competitive chess player despite having learned chess 3 weeks ago. They talked about what Daniel remembered of Brooklyn from 15 years back, before everything had changed, before every block had a different flavor of expensive in it. They didn't talk about Vivian. The name didn't come up. Not by avoidance. It just wasn't relevant to the evening. She had been a thing that happened to both of them, and the thing had resolved, and now they were 2 people at a table in Red Hook with good food between them and no particular need to excavate the past. Walking out at the end of the night, the autumn air cool and direct, Mara pulled her jacket close, and they walked in the same direction for half a block before she stopped at a corner. "This is me," she said, meaning her subway. He'd taken the F. She was taking something else. They stood on the corner for a moment. "This was good," she said. "Yeah." He meant it simply. "It was." She looked at him with that careful attention he'd come to recognize, the look that preceded her saying something honest. "I don't want to be cautious," she said. "I've been cautious my whole adult life, and I'm tired of it. But I also—" She stopped. Started again. "I want to do this right, whatever this is." "Me too," he said. "That's exactly right." She nodded, slightly relieved. "Next week?" he said. "Yeah," she said. "Next week." She went down into her subway and he stood on the corner for a moment before walking to his own, hands in his pockets, the city doing its perpetual thing around him, and felt something he had no desire to rush past or complicate or explain. Just let it be what it was. They did next week, and the week after that, and then the week stopped needing to be named individually. It wasn't graceful, the beginning of it. They were both people with significant existing lives. She had her shifts and her accumulating exhaustion. He had Maya and a job that required him physically and mentally in ways that left him genuinely depleted by end of day. Their first real argument happened about 6 weeks in, over something so small he couldn't fully reconstruct it afterward. But the shape of it was this. She had made an assumption about his evening that turned out to be wrong, and she'd moved on from the assumption without checking with him. And he'd felt the specific sting of someone deciding something about his schedule without asking. He'd said something about it in a tone that was sharper than necessary. She'd gone quiet. Not the Vivian kind of quiet, not strategic, not a reframe, just the quiet of someone who was hurt and was deciding what to do with it. "I hate that you went sharp like that," she said finally. "I know, I'm sorry. I'm not asking for an apology right now. She exhaled. "I made a wrong assumption. I should have asked you first, but the way you said that felt like I'd done something much bigger. He sat with that. You're right, he said. I went harder than the situation warranted. I'm still... He paused, trying to be accurate. I think I'm still recalibrated wrong from before. From someone who made decisions about my life without asking. You made a small wrong assumption. That's not the same thing. She looked at him. I appreciate you knowing the difference. I do know it, he said. I just didn't act like I did in that moment. Okay, a pause. I'll ask next time. And I'll try not to make you feel like a small mistake is a capital offense. They sat with that, and then she said, This is a weird conversation to have sober. And he laughed, and it broke open, and they were on the other side of it. He thought about that conversation for a long time afterward, not with anxiety, but with something like respect for the fact that they'd had it. The willingness to name the ugly thing clearly and then stay in the room while it got worked out. He'd been in enough relationships to know that the argument wasn't the problem. The argument was just information. What you did with it was the thing. What they did was stay. So, Maya met her in December. He hadn't rushed it. He'd thought carefully about timing, talked to his therapist about it, talked to Jess about it with the particular care that co-parenting required. Because Jess had opinions about who was around their daughter, and those opinions deserved consideration, regardless of the personal history between them. Jess had been unexpectedly measured about it. She'd asked a few direct questions, the way Jess always did, and he'd answered them directly. And at the end she'd said, if she's good to Maya, that's what matters. Maya, characteristically, had her own approach to the whole thing. They met at his apartment on a Sunday afternoon, low-key by design. Mara came over, he made lunch. Nothing ceremonial about it. Maya had been told there would be a friend of Daddy's for lunch, which was accurate. Maya sat across from Mara at the kitchen table and regarded her with the particular, unfiltered assessment of a child who has not yet learned to disguise evaluation as politeness. Are you the nurse? Maya asked. I am, Mara said. The one who thinks cilantro tastes like dish soap. Mara glanced at Daniel, then back at Maya. Your dad told you that? He said hi from you once, about the cilantro and the dish soap. Maya appeared to be filing this against Mara's permanent record. I like cilantro. Do you? Mara said. I put it on everything. That sounds like a personal choice I respect and disagree with. Maya considered this seriously. Have you tried it a lot of times? Enough times to know. My dad says you're not allowed to say you don't like something if you've only tried it once. That's fair, Mara said. I've tried it more than once. My conclusion is the same. Maya seemed to find this acceptable. Not agreement, but intellectual honesty, which she apparently valued. She moved on to other questions. What was the worst thing about being a nurse? Whether Mara had ever seen a broken arm in real life? Whether she thought dinosaurs would be scary or just interesting if they were alive today? Mara answered all of these with straight-faced seriousness. The worst thing was the paperwork, which Maya found disappointing. The broken arm question got a detailed and apparently satisfying answer. On the dinosaur question, Mara said she thought most people would find them interesting for about 45 seconds and then deeply terrifying for the rest of their lives, which made Maya laugh in a way that suggested she found this analysis correct. After lunch, Maya went to her room to do something involving her chessboard, which she was still convinced she was going to master, and Daniel stood at the kitchen sink rinsing plates while Mara leaned against the counter with her coffee. She's incredible, Mara said quietly. She's a lot, he said. But yeah. She looked at me like she was taking inventory. She was, he said. She does that. He paused. She'll remember everything you said today. 3 months from now, she'll bring up the dinosaur conversation. Mara looked at the doorway to the hall where Maya had disappeared. I hope she does, she said. He looked at Mara then, standing in his kitchen, coffee in both hands, the winter light through the window, his apartment around her. And he thought, this is the difference. This is what it feels like when someone is actually present in your life instead of managing their passage through it. He didn't say any of that. He finished rinsing the plates and she came and stood next to him, and they finished the dishes together, shoulder to shoulder, in a kitchen that wasn't big enough for 2 people to do dishes comfortably, and neither of them moved to give the other more space. The lease on the apartment in 4C ended in February. By then, the situation with Fitch had been fully resolved. His management company had put nothing further in writing about the vacate notice, and Renata had confirmed that their documentation was clean and complete should anything ever resurface. Vivian's attorney sent one more brief letter in November, disputing the characterization of the notice as fraudulent, using careful language that disputed without denying. Renata read it and said, "She knows she's exposed. This is her drawing a line and hoping no one steps over it." They didn't step over it. They didn't need to. The letter they'd sent had done what it was meant to do, named the thing, put it on record, made clear that two people had seen exactly what happened. That was enough. When Mara's lease ended, she moved to a smaller apartment in Prospect Heights. It was genuinely hers. She'd found it herself, signed the lease alone, chose every item that went into it. She sent Daniel a photo the day she got the keys. An empty room, bare floors, afternoon light slanting through old windows. "Mine," she wrote. Just that word. He typed back, "Yes, it is." He helped her move on a Saturday in February, along with two of her nurse colleagues who were built for this kind of work. It was cold and someone dropped a box on the stairs, and the furniture arrangement in the bedroom required 3 attempts and a significant conversation about the relationship between functional and aesthetic, during which Mara held her ground about where the dresser went and turned out to be right. They ordered pizza at 7 and sat on boxes and ate it straight from the box. And one of the nurses, a tall woman named Cressida, who had clearly been watching Daniel and Mara interact all day, leaned over to Mara at some point and said something in a low voice, and Mara shook her head and said, "Stop," but she was smiling. He did not ask what Cressida had said. He could guess. Maya asked about Mara with increasing frequency as winter turned to spring, not in the pointed way that a child who'd been briefed on adult relationship politics might, more in the natural, integrative way of a kid who has decided someone is a fixture. "Is Mara coming on Saturday? Can I show Mara my chess opening I learned?" Mara said the dinosaur thing. Do you think she meant the really big ones or also the medium ones? He had the conversation with Mara about this in the spring, walking through Prospect Park on a Sunday afternoon, the trees doing the thing they do in April when they commit to being green again. "Maya talks about you a lot," he said. "I know, you tell me." Mara smiled, looking ahead. "I talk about her too, apparently. Cressida told me I mentioned Maya 3 times in one shift briefing. Is that okay with you, the way it's going?" She looked at him. "What are you actually asking?" "I'm asking if you're in this," he said. "Actually in it. Not as a question of doubt. I don't doubt it. I just want to say it out loud and have you say it out loud." She stopped walking. They were on one of the long paths, other people moving past them in both directions, the park going on around them in that particular indifferent, beautiful way parks do. "I'm in it," she said, simply, directly, looking at him with those dark, steady eyes. "I'm completely in it, Daniel. I'm not going anywhere." "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. They kept walking. He thought, as he walked next to her in the April park, about the specific kind of love that arrives not like a revelation, but like a recognition. The moment when you realize the thing you've been building with another person has become something that you couldn't dismantle even if you tried. Not because it's permanent in some grand abstract sense, but because it has become part of the structure of your actual daily life. The texture of it, the way her name on his phone was different from any other name, the way she took up space in his kitchen in a way that felt right rather than like an intrusion, the way Maya said her name as if she'd always known it. He thought about standing outside apartment 4C with a cardboard box that weighed 11 pounds. The Rain building behind him, knocking twice the way he always had because Vivian didn't like doorbells. He thought, I walked into a building to close a door, and the door that opened was a different one entirely. 2 years passed. The way time passes when you're not waiting for something, faster than you expect, and fuller. The Carroll Gardens brownstone was completed in March of the 2nd year. Daniel stood in the front room on the last day, the renovation done, the original features restored, the plaster moldings, the walnut floors, the staircase he'd spent a week stripping back to what it had always been underneath. The clients walked through and said the right things, and he stood in the hallway afterward and felt the particular satisfaction of work completed honestly, the way a building feels when you've been true to what it was. Marco shook his hand and said, "Good one," which from Marco was a standing ovation. Mara had started taking on day shifts more regularly. A calculated decision to reclaim some hours of normal human existence, she'd said, and also because the ER night shift had started affecting her sleep in ways that were no longer sustainable. She was working toward a nurse practitioner certification, studying on her days off, occasionally sending Daniel text messages at odd hours that read like someone trying to explain a complex pharmacological concept to themselves by explaining it to someone else. He had learned more about medication interactions than he had ever anticipated knowing. He liked knowing it. He liked that there was room in his life for that kind of accumulation. The specific knowledge that belongs to someone else's expertise and becomes yours only because you live close enough to them. Maya turned 9 in the spring and had abandoned chess for an equally intense period of interest in geology, which meant the apartment now contained a growing collection of rocks that she cataloged with a small notebook. She'd met Mara's colleague Cressida at a birthday dinner and had asked Cressida with complete seriousness whether it was true that the human skeleton replaced itself over time, and Cressida had looked at Mara and said, "I see what you mean," and Mara had looked quietly pleased. Things were not always easy. He and Mara had real disagreements that took real time to work through. She had a tendency to retreat into competence when she was stressed, to become very efficient and closed off. And he had to learn the difference between when she needed space and when she needed him to stay close anyway. He had his own things, a stubbornness that occasionally looked like stability and occasionally looked like refusal, a tendency to take on more than he could hold and then feel that silently until it became obvious. They were not a movie version of a couple. They were two people with their own damage and their own histories learning to navigate around each other's sharp edges without pretending the edges weren't there. There were nights when he drove home from a long day and found her asleep on the couch with a textbook open on her chest, and he took the textbook off and put a blanket over her without waking her. And it was not romantic in any stage sense, but it was intimate in the real sense, the intimacy of being trusted with someone's ordinary vulnerability. There were mornings when she made coffee before he was up and left a cup on the counter for him, always slightly too strong because she drank it that way and still hadn't calibrated for his preference. And he drank it anyway because it was there, and because she'd left it, and because some accommodations are easy. There were hard weeks, and there were good weeks, and there were unremarkable weeks that accumulated into the comfortable, uneven, genuine fabric of a life shared between two people who had chosen to keep choosing each other. Vivian Hart did not resurface in any meaningful way. She existed somewhere in the city, possibly, probably. It was a big city that held its inhabitants in separate compartments, but she had made no contact with either of them after the attorney correspondence. Daniel thought about her occasionally, in the way you think about something you've set down, not with yearning, not exactly with anger, but with the residual awareness of having carried it. He hoped she was okay. He genuinely did. He hoped she was somewhere doing whatever she did, and that somewhere along the way she'd noticed what her efficiency had cost. He didn't spend a lot of time on it. There was too much else. Mara thought about her less than Daniel did, and with less ambivalence. She had come to a clear-eyed understanding of what those 14 months had been. Not a friendship, not a mutual living arrangement, but one person's convenient use of another person's proximity. And she'd filed it under things that had happened, things that had revealed something about her own willingness to make excuses for people who weren't treating her right. She didn't feel bitter about it. She felt, in a way that had taken time to arrive at, almost grateful, not for Vivian, not for what Vivian had done, but for what had come from it. The specific chain of events that had put her in the path of a man who showed up with a box and slept on her couch during a storm and called a tenant lawyer and sent her photos of brick walls and meant what he said. She wouldn't have scripted it, but it was what happened. He proposed on a Tuesday in October. Not an anniversary, not a holiday, not a choreographed moment in a scenic location. A Tuesday evening in the kitchen of the apartment he'd moved to the previous year, larger, with an actual second bedroom for Maya and a kitchen that fit two people doing dishes without requiring one of them to stand sideways. They'd had dinner. Maya was at Jess's for the week. They'd cleaned up together, the ordinary domestic choreography that had become second nature. Him washing, her drying, the radio on low in the background, the Tuesday evening settling around them. He had the ring in his jacket pocket. He'd had it for 3 weeks, carried it around while he waited for the right moment, and then he'd realized he was waiting for the wrong thing. He'd been waiting for a moment that felt significant enough, staged enough. And then he'd understood. The moment that was true to them was exactly this. The kitchen, the Tuesday, the dish towel in her hand, her hair pulled back with a pencil stuck through it because she'd been studying before dinner and had forgotten to take it out. He dried his hands. Mara. She turned around with a plate in both hands, looking at him with the slight raised eyebrow expression she used when she was paying attention. I need to say something. She set the plate on the counter. Okay? I spent a long time, he said, waiting outside someone else's door, not knowing if I'd been let in or just permitted to stand in the hallway. He paused. He wasn't good at speeches, and he knew it, so he decided not to make one. With you, it's different. With you, I know I'm inside. I know it every day. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not unreadable, just complex. Her hands were loose at her sides. He reached into his jacket pocket. I know this is Tuesday, he said, and we just did the dishes, and you have a pencil in your hair. She reached up automatically and found it, and looked at it, and then looked back at him. I don't want to wait for a better moment, he said. This is the moment. You're the person. He opened the box. Will you marry me? The ring was simple. He knew her. He knew she wouldn't want elaborate. A thin band, a single stone, clean and real. He'd picked it out alone on a Saturday afternoon in a small shop in the West Village, and the woman behind the counter had asked him to describe the person, and he'd said, she's direct and she's tired and she's braver than she gives herself credit for. And the woman had said, I know exactly what you need. And she'd been right. Mara looked at the ring, then at his face, then at the ring again. You've been carrying that around, she said. 3 weeks. 3 weeks. She shook her head slightly, something between disbelief and, he recognized it now, the real laugh building. You carried a ring around for 3 weeks and you chose a Tuesday after dishes. I chose an honest moment, he said. I thought you'd like an honest moment. She looked at him for a second more, and the real laugh arrived. That specific, involuntary, unperformed laugh. The one he'd first heard in the kitchen of a half-emptied apartment during a storm. The one that happened when something caught her fully off guard, and she didn't have time to moderate it. Yes, she said, still half laughing. Yes, obviously yes. He put the ring on her finger, and it fit. Because he'd asked Cressida what size, and Cressida had told him, while visibly struggling not to call Mara immediately. She looked at her hand. He looked at her hand. And then she looked up at him, and the laugh had faded, and what was there instead was just her, looking at him, steady and clear, the way she always looked when she was completely present. I'm inside too, she said quietly. I want you to know that. Completely inside. He nodded. He understood. She pulled him forward by the front of his jacket and kissed him there in the kitchen, the dish towel still on the counter, the radio still on low, the Tuesday evening still ongoing, entirely unremarkable to the city outside. Quote, they got married the following September. Not a large wedding. They didn't want large. Neither of them had ever wanted large. 23 people in a back garden in Carroll Gardens, not far from the brownstone he'd spent a year restoring, which had always felt right to him as a location even before he could have explained why. Simple food, good wine, lights strung in the trees because Mara had said she wanted lights in the trees, and what Mara wanted she should have. Maya wore a dress she had chosen herself, dark blue, which she felt was a more serious color for a serious occasion. And at some point during the evening, she climbed onto a chair to be at eye level with Mara and said something in her ear that Daniel couldn't hear. Mara pulled back and looked at her with that careful, attentive look that she gave Maya when she was taking her seriously, which was always, and said something back. And Maya nodded with great solemnity and climbed down and went back to terrorizing the appetizer table. He asked Mara later what Maya had said. She said she was glad you found me, Mara told him, and that she'd known since the cilantro thing that I was going to be okay. He laughed and felt at the same time the specific warmth of being known by his daughter, being seen clearly by her, and the accumulating richness of this life he was now fully inside. Cressida gave a toast that was funny and genuine and made exactly 2 people cry, which seemed like the right number. His sister Denise hugged Mara for a long time and said something into her shoulder that made Mara hold on a beat longer than expected. Marco attended in a suit that appeared to have been purchased specifically for the occasion and shook Daniel's hand and said, "Good one," exactly as he had at the end of the brownstone project, and Daniel thought there was probably no higher compliment in Marco's register and accepted it as such. The night went on, warm and real and imperfect in the way that real nights are. Someone spilled wine on the tablecloth. The lights in the trees flickered once and came back. Maya fell asleep in a chair at 9:30 and had to be carried out by Daniel's brother-in-law, which Maya would later deny had happened. Near the end of the evening, when the guests had thinned and the lights had been turned down and the garden had the warm, worn quality of a place where something good had just happened, Daniel and Mara stood together at the edge of it, his hand in hers, looking at the last of their people in conversation under the lights. "I keep thinking about the box," she said. "Yeah?" "The box you brought to the apartment. 11 pounds of someone's life." "I threw it in the recycling," he said. "I know." She leaned her head briefly against his shoulder. "I just think about it sometimes. The way things turn. You came to close something and you stayed." "You made coffee," he said. "It was terrible coffee." "It was," he agreed. She laughed quietly. He felt it more than heard it. "Do you ever think about her?" she asked. Not with difficulty, just curious. "Sometimes," he said, "less than I used to." He paused. "I think she is what she is. I think she'll be that until something shifts it. Maybe it already has. I don't know." "I hope she finds something real," Mara said, and he could hear that she meant it, not generously exactly, not warmly, but honestly, the way you can wish someone well without needing anything from them. "Me too," he said. They stood in the garden a little longer. The city existed beyond the fence the way it always did, enormous, ongoing, indifferent to the specific human moments playing out inside it. The lights in the trees had stopped flickering. Maya was asleep somewhere inside. Cressida was telling a story to Denise that seemed to require significant use of her hands. Marco had eaten everything on the appetizer table with the methodical contentment of a man at peace with his choices. Daniel held his wife's hand in the late September garden and thought about what it had taken to get here. Not the romantic version of that. Not the version where the journey was meaningful because it led to this moment. The more honest version, what it had cost. The months of confusion after the phone call, the box in his arms in the rain, the kitchen at midnight, the bad coffee, the specific exhaustion of 2 people who had been handled by the same person and were comparing notes for the first time. The letter in the junk drawer. The name forged on a legal document. The work of it. All the actual grinding work of building something real with another person when you're both tired and imperfect and bringing your own damage to the table. All of it had been necessary. Not because suffering is required for meaning. He didn't believe that, had never believed it. But because all of it was simply what had happened. The chain of events that was what it was. The box that weighed 11 pounds. The chain that rattled on the door. The woman on the other side who was not who he'd expected. Here was something he'd learned, on the other side of all of it, that he couldn't have known from inside it. The people who manage their exits carefully, who control the terms of every departure, who arrange other people like furniture in a room they're already leaving, they think they're protecting themselves. Maybe they are. Maybe the distance they maintain is a genuine defense against something that happened to them once, long before you met them, that they never let anyone close enough to see. Maybe Vivian Hart had her own junk drawer, her own letter she hadn't intended anyone to find. He didn't know. He'd stopped needing to know. What he knew was this: the managed exit, the controlled goodbye, the efficient disappearance. These are the strategies of people who believe that connection is a liability, that to be truly known by someone is to be in danger of them. And so they stay adjacent to closeness without entering it. They let you see the moment of real feeling, the crying at the movie, the 3 minutes after the board meeting, and then they file it away before it can become a door into something harder and realer. He had spent 8 months trying to earn his way through a door that was never going to open, and then he'd walked through a different one entirely, into a kitchen that smelled like old coffee, where a woman in scrubs told him the truth without dressing it up. And that was the thing. That was the whole thing. Not a grand revelation, not a dramatic turning point, just a woman who said what was true, and a man who stayed to hear it, in an apartment stripped bare by someone who'd already decided they were both expendable. They hadn't been. That was the answer. That was the thing that all of Vivian's planning hadn't accounted for. In the end, the people you dismiss as peripheral don't disappear when you leave. They find each other. They compare notes. They figure it out. And sometimes, not always, not neatly, not without cost, they build something she could never have built, precisely because she was too careful to try. Mara squeezed his hand once, not to say anything in particular, just to say, "I'm here. I'm still here." He squeezed back. The lights in the trees held steady. The city went on outside. And inside this one small lit garden, in a September that belonged entirely to them, they stayed.